Portugal's Golden Visa used to be one of the best pathways to EU citizenship, but now that's become questionable. Parliament just doubled the citizenship timeline from 5 years to 10 years, affecting all residence pathways, including the Golden Visa, D7, digital nomad, and everyone. With processing delays, that means the realistic timeline is now more like 12 to 15 years instead of 7 to 8. In the past, Portugal stood out because you could qualify for citizenship without living there full time. For Golden Visa holders who've invested hundreds of thousands of euros, sometimes liquidating assets or family homes, this fundamentally changes the value proposition because at the moment there are no protections for people who are already in the system but haven't yet applied for citizenship. So in this video, I'm going to break down what's changed, what it means, and at the end, I'm going to give you a framework to help you decide whether Portugal's Golden Visa still makes sense for your situation. Let's get into it. So what made Portugal so special in the first place? Well, its Golden Visa stood out for one key reason, and that is its minimal physical presence requirements. See, most EU Golden Visa programs also require substantial residency if your end goal is citizenship. Like in Greece, you need to be there 183 days per year for 7 years, I believe, in order to get citizenship. And other countries have similar setups. But Portugal only asked for an average of 7 days per year. So this made the program very attractive for professionals who wanted EU residency rights, but still needed to maintain their careers and their lives elsewhere for various reasons. With the Golden Visa, they could keep their job in New York, their business in Dubai or whatever, but while also establishing legal residency in Europe. Portugal's 5-year path to be eligible to apply for citizenship was considered one of the best in the EU for these investment-based programs. But ever since the COVID-19 pandemic, Portugal's Golden Visa processing times have increased to crazy levels. Many applicants have reported waiting 2-3 years or more for their initial residence card to be issued. And this created a major disconnect between the advertised timeline and people's actual lived experience. While the law stated 5 years of residency to be eligible for citizenship, the real timeline was closer to 7 or 8 years when accounting for these processing delays. And the official explanation from the authorities has been capacity constraints at IMA, which is Portugal's immigration agency. And IMA recently stated that they were all along, they've been prioritizing applications from more vulnerable populations like refugees, family reunification cases, and those fleeing from conflict, which is all well and good. But meanwhile, other visa categories like the D7 and digital nomad visas were still being processed at more normal speeds, typically a matter of just several months from the initial application. And this situation created a lot of frustration in the Golden Visa community, with many applicants feeling uncertain about when their applications would be resolved, if ever. But then, on October the 28th, Portugal's parliament approved a proposal to amend the nationality law. This would extend the citizenship requirement from 5 years to 10 years for most foreign nationals and 7 years for EU citizens and citizens of the Portuguese-speaking community, like Brazil, Angola, for example. And the key details here in these changes were that the residency period would now begin from the issuance of the residency card, not application submission. So that, again, was very disadvantageous because with current processing timelines, the delay could be 12 to 15 years from initial application to citizenship eligibility. And the new requirements would include not only A2 level Portuguese, but also a civic knowledge test. In all honesty, I would expect the level of that language test to be increased to at least B1. And this applies to all residency pathways, not just the Golden Visa. And critically, the approved version of this proposal doesn't include any transitional period or grandfathering provisions for current residency permit holders. Now, this is only at the time of making this video. The law still requires presidential approval, and the president can choose to approve it as it is. He can choose to veto it, or he can refer it to the Constitutional Court for further review. Some legal experts have suggested that the Constitutional Court may examine whether this lack of transitional protections is a cause for constitutional concern. And I have got a video that goes into this in detail if you want to just check that out to understand the situation in more detail. So what do these changes actually mean for the Golden Visa program in the future? Well, it represents a significant shift in this program's value proposition. In the previous framework, you can invest 500,000 euros or even less for some types of investment. You can maintain your minimal presence of 7 days a year on average, and then qualify to apply for citizenship after 5 years. And realistically, the total timeline was going to be 7 to 8 years with processing delays. Under the new framework, it's the same investment requirement, it's the same presence requirement, but now you qualify for citizenship after an entire 10 years. So the total realistic timeline is looking like 12 to 15 years now, possibly even longer. So what does this mean in practice? Well, if your goal is EU residency rights, which is the ability to live in Portugal if needed, mobility across the Schengen zone, and a Plan B option for safety and security, then nothing has fundamentally changed, and you can still get those rights when your Golden Visa is approved. But if your goal is specifically to get EU second citizenship, you're now looking at waiting twice as long as originally planned. And for some people, that might be acceptable. If you want to make your whole life in Portugal, then it doesn't matter to you as much. But for others, it makes alternative pathways more attractive. Portugal still requires less physical presence than most other Golden Visa programs, which still is significant if you're unable to relocate here full time. But this extended timeline does mean that you need to think carefully about whether the Golden Visa program in Portugal still aligns with your goals and timeline. And there's an interesting development in how this has played out over the last week or so that's worth noting. Let's look at that next. So in early November 2025, shortly after this proposal was approved in Parliament, EIMA suddenly began issuing biometrics appointments to Golden Visa applicants who'd been waiting for many, many months, even years, without updates. And several immigration lawyers reported that applications that had been pending for 2 to 3 years suddenly began moving forward. The government has announced plans to prioritise the processing of Golden Visa applications and family reunifications with the goal of eventually clearing the backlog. But whether this represents a systematic policy change, increased resources at EIMA, or some other factors isn't entirely clear at this point. But what is clear is that processing patterns do appear to have shifted in recent weeks, and this is particularly affecting current Golden Visa applicants. So, in broader context, this situation highlights some important dynamics in the citizenship by investment programs that a lot of people don't fully consider. First off, these are government programs and they're not binding contracts. Immigration policy can and does change based on political priorities, public opinion, or fiscal considerations, for example. And what's on offer today may not always be what's on offer tomorrow. Secondly, residency rights and citizenship are two different things. The Portugal Golden Visa gives you immediate residency rights as soon as you have it issued, the right to live in Portugal, be mobile across the Schengen zone, and maintain your residency status with minimal presence. But the citizenship component is a separate pathway, and that's governed by nationality law, which can be subject to change. Thirdly, processing priorities are discretionary. Governments decide how to allocate immigration processing resources based on their policy objectives. And what gets processed quickly versus slowly tends to reflect government priorities and not just capacity. And fourth, foreign residents, even those comprising about 15% of Portugal's population, unfortunately don't have voting rights or direct political representation in policy decisions that affect them. And this is really unfortunate, but it's just the reality. And none of this stuff is unique to Portugal. Dynamics like these exist in most citizenship and residency by investment programs globally. So given all of these changes, who is Portugal's Golden Visa still a good fit for? Well, there's a few different groups here. Group one is the long-term Plan B thinking. Let's say you're 40 to 50 years old and you're thinking that you might want to retire to Europe in 15 years or so. In this case, locking in your residency rights now and eventually citizenship still makes strategic sense, because by the time you're ready to relocate, you'd qualify for citizenship under this new 10-year timeline. The second group is residency rights are the priority. So for some people, the primary goal is to get immediately EU residency rights, like to escape a bad situation in your home country, for example, to get mobility across the Schengen area, and to have the option to live in Portugal. So the program still delivers this with minimal presence requirements. The third group is citizens from the CPLP, like Brazilians and other Portuguese-speaking nationals, who, under this proposal, get access to a 7-year track instead of 10. And this remains relatively competitive compared to some of the alternatives in the EU. So who should reconsider altogether? Well, the first group, obviously, is those who have citizenship as their primary goal. If you specifically want to get an EU passport quickly, then a 10 to 15 year timeline is no longer fast track. You'd be likely better off to pursue work or passive income based naturalization in a country with shorter timelines. And I am in the process of researching a video to explain all of those across the EU. The second group is if the timeline feels too uncertain. If the thought of a 12 to 15 year commitment with potential for further changes doesn't align with your risk appetite or your life planning, then you probably feel more comfortable abandoning Portugal and looking at other pathways altogether. So, although that's a framework to help you decide, there's not really a universal answer. It just depends on your specific situation, your goals, and your timeline. But my advice is to proceed with caution. So, Portugal's Golden Visa program is now a significantly different value proposition than before October the 28th. Although this proposal still requires presidential approval, he can sign it, veto it, or refer it to the Constitutional Court. That decision should come within the next few weeks from the time of making this video. And it's going to be the thing that determines whether existing applicants get any protection or grandfathering whatsoever. But if you're still considering applying for this program, then be really clear about what you're getting, which is immediate EU residency rights from when it's approved, minimal presence requirements, and a path to citizenship. Yes, it's still there, but you could be looking at 12 to 15 years realistically now instead of 7 to 8. So beyond the timeline, there's another question at stake here, and that is the question of predictability. When Portugal ended the real estate route of the Golden Visa in 2023, they grandfathered existing buyers into the program. And when they phased out the NHR tax regime, there was also a transitional period. So you can see that grandfathering has been a habit with these legal changes in the past few years. But unlike those, this citizenship proposal has no transitional provisions. Unlike those, this citizenship change so far has got no transitional provisions included. And if you're going to make a 10 to 15 year commitment, then policy stability really does matter. Portugal used to be one of the last options that combined an investment-based qualification, minimal physical presence requirements, and a reasonable timeline. But with this change, that combination has become significantly less compelling. And the reality is that there's no longer an easy path to EU citizenship for those who cannot relocate full-time. Realistically, you're looking at living there full-time on either a working visa or a passive income visa, making a 10-plus year investment commitment. You could also look at ancestry-based qualifications or extremely high wealth programs like Malta's or Austria's. This isn't just Portugal, it's becoming a broader European trend towards longer timelines and higher, tougher integration requirements. But that said, there are pathways that still exist, and there are several pathways that compete with Portugal, especially in light of these changes. So in an upcoming video, I'm going to break down a great set of alternatives, which EU countries offer faster citizenship timelines, what the trade-offs and the caveats are, and which ones actually make sense for different situations. So hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you want to get my newsletter and stay up to date on this situation, then I've dropped a link to the Digital Emigre newsletter in the description. As always, none of this is legal advice, and you should always consult a qualified immigration lawyer for the details of your specific situation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.